Well, tonight it's a very special privilege of mine to introduce Irv Kaage, a native Chicagoan, graduate of Taft High School. Class of 69, Irv, is that correct? Okay, he's back there. Not hiding, okay. Okay. Irv began working at his father and grandfather's newsstand, Kaage's Corner, at the age of 11, at the corner of Oliphant and Northwest Highway. I think we all know the location. The landmark newsstand was open every day for 82 years before finally closing shop in June of 2025. It was at this newsstand that Irv learned the principles of both business and interpersonal relationships that he applied when he entered the oil filtration business and led Transer Filter as its president for a remarkable 37 years. In growing this business into a global enterprise with factories in Chicago and Shanghai and offices in Tokyo and Brazil, Irv traveled to 39 different countries. His book, which is on display and for sale this evening, Extra Extra, My Route from Newsboy to CEO, details his travels as the company grew, and so did he. His stories include growing up in Edison Park, attending Taft in the 1960s, and raising the family in Norwood Park, along with 30 trips to Japan and Germany. It's my great pleasure to introduce Irv Kaage. Thank you for coming, Irv.
Thank you, Rich. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming tonight. It's a very impressive turnout, and we're going to do a little storytelling this evening. We're going to be talking about my book, of course, Extra Extra, my route from newsboy to CEO. And of course, route has a newspaper connotation, but a route also means the path with which you've taken. And so we'll be talking a little bit about the path that I took, first at the newsstand, and then starting a company, growing it into a global company, and many interesting people I met along the way, and many interesting circumstances that hopefully you'll find them interesting. Okay. What prompted me to write the book? Well, I have a friend and colleague for better than 35 years that was in Chicago who moved down to Florida about 10 years ago. He was in the trade show industry, and that's how we met. His name is Rich Urshik. And Rich, since he moved down to Florida, has been an author of 14 books. And we would normally go down to Florida for my birthday in February and always meet up with Rich to reminisce and talk about the old stories and the like. And when we would get finished with these meetings, he would say, Irv, you've got so many great stories about the newsstand, working at the newsstand. People don't understand what that was like, okay? How that influenced your life overall moving forward. Traveling to 39 countries, okay? I mean, you should really write a book. And I said, well, that's very nice of you to say to Rich, but who the hell is interested in reading about that? He said to me, you don't write the book to sell it. You write the book for your grandkids and your great-grandkids. If you don't, all these memories, all these stories pass when you pass. And it struck a chord with me. And I said, well, that's a good point. I'm not ready to do it just yet. Give me some time. And I made some excuses, and I said, we only have one computer in the house, Laura's laptop. I do all my stuff on my phone, and I would want to get my own computer, a desktop, and so on, and with raised keys. I don't like the recessed keys, and maybe I'll get to it. Finally, after 2 years, I got the itch to go and take the first step. I spoke to my youngest son, and I explained to him what I was looking to do with the computer, and asked if he would help me choose the proper one for the task. He did, and he installed it, and it was a few days later that I woke up with a start at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I had a talk with myself, and I said, you told Rich you couldn't go and write the book simply because you didn't have a computer, but you have one now, right? I said, yeah, I did. And it's installed, right? It's like, yeah, it is. So what excuse are you going to use now not to start the book? And I said, none. And I said, so when are you going to start the book? And I said, right now. So I threw the covers off. This was 6 a.m, threw the covers off, put my slippers on, walked to the living room, got a pad of paper and a pen, and I started writing down thoughts and memories. And, you ask where you start once more. You start at the very beginning, those things in your life that create the foundation for who you are as a person. So the first thing I wrote down was my mom and dad, Irv Kaage Jr., I'm the third. My son is the fourth, my grandson is the fifth, okay? And I just started writing chronologically different thoughts that popped into my mind, and within 5 minutes I had 40 different items, 40 different stories, and that's why there's 40 stories in the book. Not necessarily 40 chapters, because when you hear about a chapter, you think about a chapter that contains 20 or 25 pages. With the stories here, they're all about 6 to 8 pages, something like that. And I've had people tell me that when they start reading it, it's a little bit like Jay's potato chips, okay? That once you start, you want to find out, well, what happened next after this, okay? So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you tonight. Well, this is the beginning. This is my mom and dad, who many of you know. Dad, of course, was a fixture along with my brother Mike, who's here tonight, okay? At that corner for 82 years, never closed a day. Can you possibly imagine that? We'll get into that a little bit more. It's quite a commitment. Dad went to Taft High School also. I mean, he was class president, okay? A very outgoing, popular guy. Mom was a very beautiful, stylish woman, always very concerned with fashion, okay? And of course, my dad made a lot of friends at the Newsstand. And one of the friends that he made was a guy by the name of Whitey Heffren, who was a bus driver for Chicago Motor Coach, if you remember the old Chicago Motor Coach. And he talked to my dad one day and he said, listen, what you should do is someday when you have time, you should get on the bus with me. And we go out to Palatine. When we get to Palatine, there's this beautiful woman that gets on the bus, okay? And I drive her all the way into Chicago because she's going to beauty school there, okay? So my dad took the time and rode with him on the bus. The doors opened, my mom got on, and she sat down next to him. And as legend goes, they talked all the way into Chicago, and by the time they got there, after the hour and 20-minute ride, they were, quote, going steady. The funny thing was, there must be a statute of limitations, because we always pictured when we, and we heard that story many, many times, as you can imagine, that she sat down next to my dad because it was the only seat that was available. And when they got up in years, my daughter was videotaping some of the stories, and she asked my mom about it. And she confessed and said, no, there were plenty of seats on the bus, but your father was a very handsome man, and that's why I sat next to him. So they started dating, but of course that was difficult for them because she was in Palatine before Palatine was Palatine, okay? And Dad didn't have a car. I mean, he had to borrow his father's car. So they started dating, and after 6 months, they weren't engaged. The problem was that my mom's dad, okay, was a short, wiry, stubborn German, the type of guy that built his own house, okay, and it was my way or the highway, okay. He was not pleased with this engagement. Okay, he said, no, this guy's not good enough for you. This marriage will never last. You'll never have a happy life together with him. Okay, you can set the date, but we'll see how it goes. So he was hoping that it would be pushed off each time. Okay, So when it got time, close for the date for the wedding, he said, you have to push it off for 6 months. So they pushed it off for 6 months. And when it got close again, he said, you have to push it off 6 months. And they did once more. And when it got close again, he said, you have to push it off 6 months. And my mom agreed, but my dad didn't. Sorry. But Dad didn't, and he broke up with Mom. And he didn't call her for a week. And then he called her a week later on Valentine's Day and said, listen, I love you and I think you love me. If you do, okay, in 2 days is my birthday, February 16th. You take the train in from Palatine, we'll get married and we'll start our life together. And she agreed to do so. I'll just do a little aside here for a moment, because when the folks both passed because of COVID, I was interviewed by WGN, and they asked many questions about Mom and Dad and their life together. And I spoke a lot about my dad, and he said, well, I mean, how would you describe your mom? And over and above the way I already did, I had to think about it. And I said, if I would use one word to describe Mom, it would be courageous. And he said, courageous? Why would you say courageous? I said, because for her to go against the wishes of her father, okay, she knew there was no going back, okay? And that's exactly what happened, because she came into Chicago. They got married at the parsonage behind Edison Park Lutheran Church. Pastor Nasby was the pastor there, okay? He married them, okay? He asked them, why are you getting married like this? I mean, do you have to get married? Is Muriel pregnant? He said, no, we just love each other. We don't want to wait anymore. So they had $100 to their name, and they went to the old Edgewater Beach Hotel, which was a resort back in the day, spent the whole $100. And the following day, my mom called her dad and said, Dad, Irv and I are married. And he said, that's what I thought. Come on out to the house. All your belongings will be out on the front lawn. And that's what he did. Clothes, furniture, etc. So that's how they started their life together. And they truly were a loving couple, okay? Some people are not physically affectionate, as you know, okay? Especially if you're Swedish, normally that's not the case, okay? But they were always holding hands. They were always giving each other a smooch. And in later years, when they moved out of the house over by St. Juliana, they moved into a condo that we had bought for them in our complex in Park Ridge. And each day I would go down, we would share a cocktail together, and then I would help them to get into bed, okay? And as I was helping Dad one day, he said to me, you know what my favorite part of the day is? No. When I can climb into bed and I can put my head on your mother's shoulder. And to make light of it, I nicknamed it the violin position, because you're going to put the violin here, and that's where his head always was, okay? So we would joke each night when they would get into bed, and I would say, violin position tonight, Pops? Yeah. Mom and Dad were married for 70 years. They celebrated their anniversary on his birthday, February 16th, in 2020. Approximately 10 weeks later, they both came down with COVID. Came down with it the same day. They went to Lutheran General in different ambulances at different times, okay? They were put in different rooms on different floors. And if you remember the way it was back then, everything was locked down, okay? And I had received a phone call from the hospital after they were in for 4 or 5 days and said, your mom's not doing well. If you want to see her before she goes, you should come. So I went. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. I sat next to her bed. And she had been saying for like the last 2 years, when she would look at my dad, she would say, when we go, we're going together, right? Anyway, I sat next to Mom for an hour. She didn't move during the hour, okay? And then I got up and said, Mom, it's time for me to go, okay? And I stood up, kissed her goodbye, and she opened her eyes and said, thanks for coming. It was a couple days later on Sunday that we got the phone call again, and they said, it's serious, you better come, okay? They called my sister Patty, who's here tonight, okay? And Patty had always been very devoted to the folks. And she hadn't been able to see them since this COVID restriction when everything was shut down. She desperately wanted to go and see them now, but was concerned that she might catch COVID. Okay. And I said, this is a decision that you have to make. So she decided to go. We went together, okay? She went up first. I might have to back up for a second because on Friday, 2 days before this phone call, Patty had called crying to me at the office and saying that she had talked to Dad, and Dad was saying, please, you have to help me. Please help me, okay? So I went to the hospital and went into his room. He couldn't recognize who I was because I was covered head to toe with hospital garb on, okay? And I pulled down my mask and I said to him, Dad, sorry. Pops, it's me. What do you want? What can I do? And he just looked at me and said, get Mama. So I left and I spoke to the doctors. And I said, listen, this is what you need to do. You need to go and get them together in the same room. When they get in the same room, you have to push the bed side by side, okay? And this is my cell phone number. When that happens, call me, regardless of what time it was. They called at 11 o'clock at night, okay? They said, we just brought them in. Your dad was in first. We brought your mom in. They smiled at each other and held hands. "70 years, it'll never last, huh?" So on that Sunday, when Patty and I went to go and see them, she went in first because I hadn't seen them before, a few days before. And she was in for 20 minutes. When she came down, she said, Dad passed already. And then I went in. I said goodbye to Pops, okay? And I walked over to Mom's side of the bed and said, Pops is gone now, okay? You can go too if you want. And her eyes, as I looked at her, her eyes were as wide as saucers as she was looking up at the ceiling, like she was looking at the stairway to heaven once more. She died 36 hours later. So why do I bring up this long story? I bring it up because this was the foundation of my youth. Not everybody has a family like that. Not every family can illustrate and experience love like that. And I did. And we passed it on to our family and our kids too. Pops taught me other things also. We grew up on Alcott Street, 2 blocks off Toohey near St. Juliana, and because of that, we went to Frederick Stock School, which went up to 6th grade. After that, you had to go to Ebinger. And this was back in the day when classes had, 6A and 6B, and depending upon when you were born. So when I went to Ebinger, brand new school, brand new kids and the like, I had a decision to make, either go and fall back a half year or to go ahead and take a year and a half in 1 year, and that's what I chose to do. And it was an adjustment. It was hard for me, okay? And then summer came in the in 64, and I was looking forward to the break. And Pop said to me, I hope you don't think that now that school's out, you're just gonna sleep in late each day, okay? And you're gonna watch TV and play with your friends. And of course, that's exactly what I planned on doing. He said, that's not the way it's going to be, okay? You're 12 years old now, okay? You know that the train comes in at 10 o'clock in the morning up in Edison Park, and it brings the first delivery of the Chicago Daily News there. You have to ride your bike up to the newsstand every day, okay? You have to meet the train at 10 o'clock, or else they keep the papers. It goes all the way to Crystal Lake. Then you have to work at the newsstand with the adult who worked there, Billy Dorr, okay? Billy Dorr was probably about 45, and Billy was not 100% normal, okay? He was, he could do math and take care of himself and the like, but he wasn't 100% there, okay? So I would work with Bill each day, and for the first couple of years, Bill was the adult and I was the kid, okay? He was about 45, okay? And after a couple of years, okay, I was the adult and Billy was the kid. Anyway, after about 2 weeks, Pops pulled me aside and he said, listen, you're doing a good job here. I think it should be paid for your efforts. And I was astounded. It never occurred to me that I would be paid for my effort. I was just doing it for the family. I knew other people got paid, but I didn't think I would be paid. He said, at the age of 12, how much do you want? And this when newspapers were 7 cents, okay? And it's like, well, my passion was collecting baseball cards, you know, and a pack of baseball cards was 20 cents, I think, something like that. I says, I think I should make 10 cents an hour would be good. You know, I work 2 hours a day, and, you know, I'm there for 5 days a week, so, you know, I make $1, I can buy 4 packs of cards. Okay. It was a couple weeks after that that I said to Dad, okay, we have to sit down and talk. It's like, about what? I said, I don't think I'm being paid enough. He said something really important, okay? That was your choice for the 10 cents an hour. What do you think you're worth? I said, I'm worth at least 20 cents an hour, okay? He said, okay. Remember that lesson moving forward. Never sell yourself short. So there were other challenges that were brought upon me because I took 1.5 years in 1 year. And one was, as you know, when you're 16, you can get your driver's license, and that's a big thing. You know, you have that freedom at that point, freedom to date and so on. But for myself, I didn't get my driver's license until it was February of my junior year. So that meant if I wanted to date, I had to double date. So at this particular point, they had the homecoming dance coming up, okay? And I didn't have anybody I was seeing, but there was a girl that I knew from Ebinger, Donna Ross, okay? Her sister Roberta was my 7th grade girlfriend, okay? And I asked her if she'd like to go. She said she'd like to go. Great. So the big evening came. I was going to be picked up by one of my friends. The folks decided they were going to go and take Pat and Mike out to dinner, okay? And so I showered and got dressed and waited for my buddy to come and pick me up, and then we'd go and pick up Donna. About 30 minutes before, the phone rang, and I figured it was him just confirming the time and all that stuff. And it was a young guy that was working at the newsstand, and he shouted into the phone, Muggsy, which is my nickname for everybody who knows me when I was a young kid. Muggsy, the newsstand's on fire. Okay. The fire department's up here. We have all the papers in there for the weekend. They're throwing them in the street. They're hosing them down. What do I do? What do I do? Well, I was a kid. I didn't know what to do. Okay. But I said, hold on, I'm on my way, okay? So I didn't panic, okay? I thought about it. I finished getting dressed and went to a neighbor's house. I said, there's an emergency at the newsstand. Can you possibly give me a ride up there, okay? He gave me the ride up, okay? There wasn't much I could do at that particular point. Before I left the house, I left a cryptic note for Dad, okay? Dad, newsstand on fire. I'm on my way. Come when you can. But once more, there was another lesson learned at the newsstand once more, okay? And we had items like this. Some emergencies bigger than others, okay? But you learn to deal with it. You learn not to panic. You learn to be calm, okay? And that once more served me well when I was in the corporate world dealing with, companies like Foxconn in China and people like that. I met my wife, Laurel, okay, at Taft High School, okay? I had heard of her name before, but I didn't actually know who in the world she was until we had a class together as juniors. They took attendance the first day. I called her name, Laurel Thorne. She raised her hand, and I looked and said, oh, okay, now I can put a face to a name. We found out later on that Laurel's mom and dad went to Taft together also. We found out later on that Laurel's mom and my dad went to kindergarten together also here in Norwood Park. So the lineage went back a long way. Laurel and I continued to go and date through high school, okay? I went to a small university up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, okay, called Lakeland University. It was about 2 hours and 20 minutes away, something like that. And I was on the football team there. I played for a total of 9 years overall. And my center from the Edison Park Cardinals is here today, Mickey Wojcik, believe it or not, all these years ago, talking 60 years ago. So if I didn't have a football game to play in, I was home every weekend, okay? I was home every weekend. I would go and you see Laurel in the evening. I would work at the stand all day long from, 5 o'clock in the morning until 5 or 7 in the evening. That's the way it was, Earn some cash, see her, and then drive back up on Sunday night and then just rinse and repeat, kind of thing. One of the things that attracted me to Laurel is she's got a couple of real interesting qualities. Number one is she's very curious, okay? And another thing is we're very different personality-wise. I'm a big picture guy. She's a detailed person, okay? She likes to try all sorts of new things. I'm more of a conservative person that way. When I graduated from Lakeland in 1973, I was home for just a couple of months, and Laurel suggested we go to the ballet downtown. And it's like, speaking honestly, after being married for 50 years, I had no desire in terms of going to the ballet, okay? But I went anyway. And when we sat together during intermission, I started musing and thinking about our life together. And I said, I've been giving our life a lot of thought, and I'm wondering, we've been going together here now for 6 years, something like that. Where do we go from here? She says, I don't know. I says, I don't see us, continuing to date. We've been dating for 6 years, something like that. I don't think I want to do that. Stopping by and picking you up at your folks' house and all this stuff. I don't really want to do that. And I don't see us moving in together. Your folks wouldn't like it. My folks wouldn't like it. No. Said, I think the only thing that makes sense for us is that we should get married. I know I love you, and I think you love me. We should get married. And she said, really? And I said, yeah. Okay. And she said, does that mean you're asking me to marry you? And it was at that moment, because I had given no thought to this at all prior to these words coming out of my mouth. They were just honest and pure and the like. And I said, I guess I am, okay? I says, okay. So we kissed each other and said, well, when do you want to get married? This was the end of August. She said, I always wanted to get married the Friday after Thanksgiving. I said, okay, it's a little bit strange, but okay, if that's what you want to do, we'll do that. All right. That was Friday night. Sunday afternoon at the dinner table with my folks before I went back to Lakeland. This was close to Laurel's birthday, and my mom had always helped me shop for Laurel for a gift. I said, oh, Mom, you don't have to help me shopping this year. I already know what I want to get for Laurel. And she said, what is that? And I said, I'm going to get her a ring. She said, oh, are you guys engaged? I says, yeah, we're engaged. Oh, terrific. That's nice. Such a nice girl. When did this happen? Friday night. So when are you planning on getting married? We said, Friday after Thanksgiving. She said, strange. It's Friday after Thanksgiving. What year are you talking about? And we said, well, this year. And she said, this year. Oh my God. And then she nudged my father and said, Irvin. When she used that tone of voice and called him Irvin, it was always a very serious thing. Irvin, you have to ask him. And Mama made Southern fried chicken, okay? So Dad was munching down on the chicken, and he says, ask him what? And she says, oh, forget it, I'll ask him, okay? Do you and Laurel have to get married, okay? The same question Pastor Nasby asked them. And I gave him the same answer, which was, no, we just love each other. We want to begin our life together, okay? And that's what we did. And because the date was such a strange date, nobody wants to get married the Friday after Thanksgiving, one of the halls was open, okay? We had a beautiful wedding. We had a nice honeymoon in San Francisco. Living large is what we did, okay? And that's how we began our life together. Now this was 1973, okay? And as I mentioned, the Newsstand life was a tough life. Okay. For those of you that don't know, the Newsstand is 7 days a week. Okay, you get 1 week off vacation. Okay, 7 days a week. An easy day was working 10 hours a day. Okay, a hard day was working 13, 14 hours a day every day. Okay, and Mike, you did it for how many years? Better than 60 plus years. My brother Mike. So anyway, Laurel and I had talked about it many times. I was not happy in that life, okay? It was hard to go and have a normal life, okay? And I was looking for a way to address the situation with my dad, and it's not possible. It's too uncomfortable. Then suddenly God intervened in this situation, okay? And after 102 years, I think it was, the Chicago Daily News announced that they were going out of business. My dad had 3 newsstands, but half of our income came as independent contractors for the Chicago Daily News. We had our own vehicles, and we delivered all the newspapers to all the hotels in Rosemont and the office buildings and 7-Elevens and the like, and same in Skokie. So they announced within 30 days they're out of business. Okay. Dad called a powwow and said, with Mike and myself, okay, there were other people that worked in the stand, but this was family. And he said, we're in trouble, we have a problem. This is going to cut into the income by 50%, and there's not enough for everybody. And I spoke up right away and said, Dad, let me be the one to go, okay? You started the business, Mike loves the business, I'm the one that went to school and has a degree and the like, let me do it. And he said, well, what will you do, okay? I said, I don't know, but I'll find something. Now, this took place at a time when our daughter was 13 months old, our son was a month old, we had a new mortgage on a condo, we had no job, and we had no money. My uncle heard about a sales position with a company down in Broadview called Electro Tools, okay? And thought that it might be something that would interest me, okay? So I contacted them, and they said, oh, listen, we're only dealing with people that have degrees. And I says, well, I have a degree in sociology. Okay, we'll meet with you. So at that point, I had to type up my very first resume, believe it or not, okay? I was 26. And I drove down to Broadview. Now, Broadview for me would be like, I know, driving down to O'Fallon, Missouri, okay? When you live up here, you don't go south. It's just, and they stay there and we stay here. Okay? I went down there and I met with Frank Rasenko, important name to remember, president of the company. And he looked at the resume, says, there's nothing here. We're looking for a guy who's going to be a salesman to call on 350 accounts in this area here, selling our line of perishables for the tool and die trade and all that stuff. What makes you think that you're qualified for a job like this? I said, listen, I've been doing a job like this since I'm 12 years old, okay? I know how to manage my time. I know how to get results, okay? I work very well with people, okay? I said, but I have to tell you something. I have to be honest with you. And that is, I don't know what in the world you guys do. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing the name of the company correctly, okay? But I do know one thing. He said, what's that? I said, I need a job, okay? I got a wife and 2 kids, okay? And I need a job. And I promise if you'll train me in your business, okay, you will not be disappointed. And I guarantee that I'll be successful. They said, how can you guarantee that? I says, because failure is not an option. I drove back home from Broadview, never thinking I would see Broadview again. 2 hours later, the phone rang. It was Frank Krasinko. He said, Irv, how would you like to be our new salesman? I said, oh, this is another gift from God. Okay, that would be great. When can you start? This was like Wednesday. I can start Monday. Okay, great. I said, can I ask, what's the salary? What's the compensation? He said, $16,000 a year. I said, oh man, is there any way that, we could make it $18,000 a year? That's what I'm making at the Newsstand now, and that's what my budget's based on and the like. He said, no, 16,000, that's what you're worth to us right now. If you do well, we'll take care of you, don't worry, okay? So I started on a new adventure, a completely different feel, okay? Selling these supplies and accessories for the electrical discharge machining trade, but they did have a small capital equipment line which included a filtration system made in Sweden called the Transor filter. And I took a liking to that because it did an amazing job in terms of cleaning the oil used in the process. In one pass through the filter, it goes in like a strong cup of coffee, comes out the other end looking like a glass of white wine. Amazing, still to this day, okay? I took a liking to it, okay? Within 4 months' time, I was product manager of that division of the company. They raised my salary to $24,000. I started traveling to different trade shows, and when I was in LA, I met a couple of guys from Accela Corporation, which was one of the companies that made the electrical discharge machines that we served, okay? It was in June of that year, 1979, I got a phone call from this person that I had met in LA. He introduced himself and he says, you remember we met in LA? I said, I don't remember that, no. He says, yeah, you put on a demonstration with the filter and all that stuff, yeah. Listen, we are really beefing up our EDM operation here with the corporation, and we're looking to go and hire a regional manager here in Chicago. We think you'd be a perfect guy for that. I said, I'm really not interested. I mean, I'm really happy here with the people now. And he said, no, I think that it's a very substantial position. You should consider it. I said, no, thanks, okay. He said, yeah, but the office, is located just 2 miles from your home, okay. I said, no, I don't think so. He said, but you've only had one interview, okay, in your life, your business career. This would be a good opportunity for you to go and have a second interview, okay? And it made sense to me. So we met, okay? And to make a long story short, I had no choice but to go and leave the company that hired me, okay, after 15 months, okay? And the first year I was with Accela Corporation, I made $40,000. I was responsible for 12 states throughout the Midwest. I set my own schedule. I had a company car so I could sell my car. I had an office, whereas the other place I didn't have an office. I had an expense report and I didn't have an expense report before. So it was a no-brainer to go and make that. The downside of that was the person who was my boss is probably the only person that I didn't really care for in my career. He was a preppy, okay? Once more, at that point, I was less than 30 years old. He was about 50, okay? White hair, turtle frame glasses and the like, okay? Rather snobbish, okay? And he came to Chicago one day and he said, what sort of business do you have on the forefront? And I said, I think there's a pretty good chance we get 3 orders, in the next week. Our product was selling for about $30,000 to $50,000. So you have to put that in perspective, okay? Because as you look at it, a year and a half before, I'm selling newspapers on the corner for 30 cents, 35 cents, and now it's 35,000. I says, I think I can go and get 3 orders in the next week. He said, you're not going to get 3 orders in the next week. Okay. I said, I really think I can. He says, I tell you what, if you get 3 orders in the next week, okay, I'll fly back out from Hartford where he was based, and I'll take you and your wife out to Maxime's, very fancy French restaurant, as you know, downtown Chicago, okay? A week later, I phoned him because I had the 3 orders, okay? And I said, when are you coming in, okay? He came in, and we went down to Maxime's, okay? And in typical Ray Pullis fashion, when the waiter came, he said, Irv, why don't you go and order the wine, okay? Well, I mean, I was a young guy, didn't know much about wine, okay? I know that as a family, we were going to have a Beaujolais every Thanksgiving, something like that. So I said to the waiter, we'd like to have a bottle of Beaujolais to go and share, the 3 of us. And Ray looked at me and said, Irv, it's not Beaujolais, it's not Beaujolais, it's Beaujolais. I said, no, thanks for correcting me. And I said to the waiter, I really don't know much about picking out wine. Why don't you pick out one of your finest and just bring it to us then? And looked at Ray and said, yeah. So anyway, what transpired was after that, this was a time when Jimmy Carter was president. And perhaps if you remember, gas prices went through the roof, inflation was high, the prime rate was 24%, there was no business to be had at that point. You could call in the customers, but you know, there's no business. Well, it winds up that there's a new company that's coming into America, a joint venture between an American firm and a Japanese firm called Sodic, okay, based in New Jersey, and they're looking for a regional manager here in Chicago, and someone will go and set up the office here in Chicago, okay? And Frank Racinko, the president who first hired me into the business, recommended me for that position, okay? And I was hired. So I was introduced to the international corporate world, if you will. And because of that, my first trip to Japan was in August of 1982. It was rather interesting because the management we had at the company was American at that point, but all the technical people were Japanese. And the head technician, okay, from Japan, his name was Ted Fujiwara, okay? And Ted was a nice guy, okay? But there's a problem with the Japanese, and that is that they have a very difficult time in terms of pronouncing my name, because they can't pronounce their R's, they can't pronounce their V's, okay? So he would call, and he would call me Ub, okay? And I said to him one time, I'll get back to that in a second, but when I had joined the company, I thought it would be a good idea if I took some Japanese language classes, that it would further my career and the like, just enough to go and get by. So Ted calls up one day, okay, and called me Herb again. I said, listen, my name is not that difficult to go and say, Ted. Let me ask you this, what sound does an angry dog make? And he said, Arr. And I said, and what sound does a Honda motorcycle make when you rev the engine? He said, ooh. I said, put that together. He says, Arr. So that solved that problem. Okay. He phones me up a couple of days later, and he says, hello. Arr. And I said, hello, Ted. And he said, Urson, can you do me a favor? And I said, tell me what the favor is. If it's something I can help you with, I'm happy to do it. And he did, and it was no problem. And I said, I can do the favor for you. Can I tell you why? He said, okay. And I said, because Fujiwara-san watashi no shujin. And it was just silence on the other end of the line. And I figured I really blew his mind, because he didn't know I'm taking these classes, and this is pretty darn good. He said, can you say that again? I said, Fujiwara-san watashi no shujin. And he says, you'll do it because I'm your husband. So in Japanese, you have two words that are very close, shujin and yujin. One means friend, the other one means husband. My dealings with the Japanese company came to somewhat of an abrupt end. Top U.S. management left, okay, and they chose to hire a very successful salesman in our field who was located in New Jersey. His name was Tony Pokalski, okay, and Tony was very successful, but he had no experience in terms of dealing with the Japanese. So he really asked for me to go in, help him as much as I could, giving him the ins and outs and things of that nature, okay? And he had been there for just about a year, and he said, listen, Irv, I'm looking at your compensation package. You're on a straight salary right now, okay? And I'm behind on my slides here. What is this? Okay. The lovely bride and groom. Newspaper's gone. We're almost caught up. The first trip to Japan in a kimono. I learned that there's a proper, in Japan there's a proper way to do everything, even if you're a garbage man, okay? And there's a proper way to go and tie the obi, okay, around your waist. You don't tie it like a bathrobe. Come around the front and do it. Put it in front first, and then around the back, and then around the front, and then you tie it. And you wear it low, under the waist. Yeah. So Tony Pokalski had said to me, listen, at the present time, you're just, you have a fixed salary. I think that it should be a fixed salary and should have a commission too. I said, I'm prepared for that. I mean, that's what I was doing with my friend Ray Pullis, okay? He says, okay, what we want to do though is we want to go and cut your base salary by $10,000, okay? I said, well, I don't agree to that, remembering what Pop said. We went back and forth for a number of weeks in regards to this, okay? In the meantime, okay, Frank Rasinko's company, okay, who first hired me in the business, okay, the filter business was going nowhere. After 5 years, they were averaging $175,000 a year, okay? And it looked as though they were going to lose the line. So they were prepared to go and set up a brand new company that was 50% owned by Frank's company, 50% owned by the Swedish patent holder, okay? And they wanted me to come back and run that business, okay? And I kept pushing it off because it was a huge job to do, a startup like that. So finally, after about a month going back and forth with Frank and Tony and I negotiating, okay, I talked to Tony one day and I said, listen, Tony, we've got so much work to go and do here. We're $3,000 apart in terms of the money package. Why don't we do this? Why don't we just split it, okay? We have bigger fish to fry and we just move on from there, okay? He said, no, I don't do that, okay? That's my final offer. And I said, are you serious? I mean, after a year of bringing you along and all that, you'd let me walk away from the company over $1,500? It's tip money. The Sodic machines were selling for $200,000 to $250,000 now. He said, Irv, if you think you can get a better offer someplace else, you should take it. I said, yeah, seriously? Yeah, seriously. Hung up the phone, picked up the phone, called Frank Rasenko. I said, Frank, you still want me for that job for the new startup company? He said, yep. I says, is this what we're talking about in terms of parameters? Yes. I says, I take it. Great. Hung up the phone, picked up the phone, called New Jersey and spoke to the head Japanese guy and said, my 2 weeks notice, I'm out of here. He said, why would you leave? I says, ask Tony about that. Okay. Once more, the lessons learned at the Newsstand, okay? Never sell yourself short. You'll always regret it. So I joined Electro-Tools again. I came back home, if you will, okay? The problem was Frank didn't tell anybody in the company I was coming home, including my former boss, the vice president of sales, who was in charge of the filter business. He didn't tell him I was coming back to take that position. Even though they knew they were coming, they didn't have an office for me, they didn't have a desk, they had nothing for me. So they put me in the conference room. Conference room was about 8 by 10, okay, with dark paneled wood, no windows except in the door, okay? And that's where I sat for a whole week, going through the files, trying to go and formulate a plan. Frank had said, Irv, whatever you need, you can just ask me. Okay, whatever you want to do, you can do. It's like, well, you know, choice is a wonderful thing, as long as you have a plan and you know what you want to do. It's like going to a smorgasbord for the first time. You don't know where to begin. You have to, once more, not panic. You have to go and take some time. You have to analyze the situation and move forward. And that's what I did that week. At the end of that week, I agreed to go and have a drink with a friend of mine, Larry Anderson, at Moretti's, when it was called Snuggery. We sat down at the bar and he said, hey, how's the new job going? Okay. I said, man, I tell you, I made the worst mistake of my life coming to this company. Really? I said, yeah, with the Japanese company, I chose the location here in Chicago. I furnished the place, I designed the place, and now they don't even have a desk for me. And my old boss hates me. He said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What are you going to do? I said, I can't quit. You know, I never go back to the Japanese company, okay? And I gave Frank my word that I would turn it around. And Frank has come to bat for me several different times, okay? So I says, the only thing I can do is I can work like hell for a year, okay? And then when the business starts going, then I can leave with good conscience, okay? And of course, I wound up being there 37 years. Because once it started to go, then it started to go. It went so well that the sales were no longer 175,000 average per year, okay? After 5 years, we had hit $2 million in terms of sales. It was pretty good. I was pretty proud of that. We had to work hard. The average price of a product was $25,000 to $50,000. Okay, all the filtration systems were made in Sweden and then shipped over here. Okay, but what happened was the company that owned the 50%, okay, was sold, and they were sold to a group of people from Europe who did not have a good reputation. And we tried to go and buy out their 50% because we had already owned 50%. And eventually they agreed to that, okay? And to do it, we needed two investors, each coming in with $100,000, okay? The one investor who volunteered right away was Frank Rosenko. The Lord works in mysterious ways, okay? We said, oh, we know who we can go and get for the other one right now. We've got a very, very good customer in Detroit who looks like Tom Selleck. He's about my age, okay? He got a lot of money. I mean, his company's very prosperous, okay? He said, okay, that sounds good, Irv. Come on out to Detroit and go and meet with my financial people and attorneys and so on, and we'll work things out, okay? I says, because, you know, we've got a deal whereby the closing is Tuesday, you know, so we have to work this out. It was a day or two after I was there in Detroit, I received the fax from his attorney and his accountant saying, we've advised Mr. Mullen not to proceed with this. This is too risky an involvement. I phoned Frank. I said, Frank, we're in trouble. Again, we're in trouble. Life is all about trouble, okay? Everybody has trouble. You just have to go and push through it, okay? And eventually there's light at the end, okay? I said, Frank, we're in trouble. Tom Mullen is out. Okay, what are we going to do? He said, well, I had a conversation with a guy that you know, okay, at the corporate office. He's the vice president of engineering. His name is Nick Meropis. I got to catch up with my stuff here, guys. Oh. I'm saving the good stuff for last here. Yeah, Joey Heatherton. Yeah, I'll just leave Joey Heatherton up. Yeah. He says, you know Nick Meropis, why don't you contact Nick? Because I told him what we're looking to do, and he said he might be interested. I said, oh, Frank, I mean, I don't really know Nick that well. I mean, I've met him on a couple of occasions, but can't you phone him? He's your friend, he's your colleague. He says, no, you should phone him, Irv. So this was on a Wednesday. I phoned his office, had to leave a voicemail message. I didn't hear back Wednesday. Didn't hear back Thursday. Didn't hear back Friday. Saturday night, we're walking out the front door to go to church. The phone rings. We're actually walking out the door. I said, let me go and get the phone and see who it is, okay? I pick it up. He says, Irv? Yeah. Nick Meropis. I says, hi, Nick. He says, I got your message. What's up? It's like, oh, I don't know really where to start, you know. We haven't seen each other for like 6 years or whatever, but this is the deal. And Frank said you might be interested. He said, well, you know, I might be. What are we talking about? And I said, yeah, it's $100,000. He says, oh, that's a lot of money. I says, I understand, Nick, you know, and that I understand if you don't want to do it, okay? But I have no choice but to go and call. You're my last hope with this, okay? He said, well, when do you need the money? And I says, I need it wired to my private bank account in Chicago on Monday for closing on Tuesday. He says, Irv, I'm in the Bahamas on vacation. It's Saturday night down here, okay? I can't do anything now. I said, okay, Nick, but thanks for taking the time anyway. Nick said, I didn't say I wouldn't do it, okay? Send me the banking information and count me in. And I said, really? Why? Why do you want to do this? Okay. And he said something that I hadn't heard my whole life, but really impacted me. And he said, because I believe in you. I believe in you. Okay. Nick passed away at the age of 95. This was about 5 years ago. Okay. When Nick passed, our sales were 20 million. So the 10% of the company that Nick bought for $100,000, you know, was worth much more than that, along with the dividends and the like that transpired. I see we're running on here, okay? Well, we'll just hop directly to the Joey Heatherton thing. For a second. Okay, yeah. Okay, well, in terms of travel experiences, it's not just overseas, it's also domestic. And I spent a lot of time in LA over the years, okay? And I was there with my business partner over 20 years ago, I guess. We were staying in Anaheim and we had an exhibition downtown LA, okay? And the exhibition got over at 6 o'clock. And I said, this is crazy for us to try and drive back to Anaheim. It's going to take us 2 hours to do. I said, the Oscars are taking place tonight, okay? We'll go and watch the Oscars and then we'll go and we'll drive back. He said, well, where would we go? I said, I don't know, but we'll know when we find it, okay? So we started cruising west on Wilshire Boulevard towards Beverly Hills. And we got by the Beverly Wilshire Hotel where they filmed Pretty Woman, okay? And I said, this is where we're going to go, okay? So we went inside and we're walking down the street. We're looking for a bar to go and watch the Oscars, okay? And suddenly three young girls, okay, in evening gowns cut in front of us, were walking in front of us. We walked into the front door and my business partner says, Irv, there's a bar right here. We should go here. And there was nobody in that bar, okay? I said, just follow the girls and see where they go, okay? And there was another bar way in the back of the hotel, and that's where they were going. And we went in, and that bar was packed with people, all for the after party. All the guys in tuxedos, all the ladies in evening gowns, okay? Only 2 seats available together right at the bar. So we sat down to go and have a drink and watch the Oscars. Struck up a conversation with a woman next to me who worked for a entertainment attorney out there. Her name was Mary Jo Barnett, okay? And we chatted for a bit, okay? And she said, you're not from around here, are you? I said, no, I'm from Chicago. She said, I'm from Indiana. I says, what is it that went and gave it away? Is it my accent or something? She said, no, you don't seem like you want anything from me. And I said, want anything from you? What would I want from you? I'm just here having a drink with my business partner. She says, no, that's not the way it is in LA. Everybody's your best buddy until you can't do anything for them anymore, and then they're finished. To make a long story short, we watched the 3-hour broadcast of the Oscars there. And at the end of it, I said to her, can you recommend a restaurant here that would be cozy, good food that's not too far away, because we got to go back to Anaheim again and all that. She says there's a place that is not too far away from here in West Hollywood, okay? It borders Beverly Hills, okay? And it's been there back then, 40 years, okay? Very unassuming place. You drive right by it. It's called Dan Tana's, okay? And it's red leather booths, okay? Red checkered tablecloths, okay? And 80% of the people that go there are Hollywood people, okay? But the star of the show was the bartender who you see with the red jacket, Mike the bartender, okay? And he was a little bit like Don Rickles, okay? That would go and heckle the people that he liked, kind of thing, okay? And with Dan Tana's restaurant was split in half, and when you came in the front door, the bar was right here. And everybody at the bar would look to see who it was, because they didn't know who it was going to be, Clint Eastwood or whoever it was, okay? And after I had gone there a couple of years, when I walked in the front door and everybody looked, Mike the bartender looked at me and said, look who's here now, Mr. Chicago. How many times have I told you I don't want you coming to my place anymore? And everybody laughed and the like. Coincidentally, with Mike, he passed away from COVID also. He was bartender, so he was a legend in LA, okay? He passed away from COVID just a couple of months after the folks did, okay? But I bring it up simply because, okay, to give you some background information, it was 2 weeks before, perhaps you remember Chicago was in line for the Olympics, was a possibility for the Olympics here, and they were going to announce it down at Daly Center. So I decided I wanted to be there for this momentous situation, okay? So I took the train down, and as I was halfway there were people that were walking back towards the train already. And I stopped them and said, am I going the wrong way, or is it some other place? They said, no, they decided already. Chicago was the first one out. It's like, okay. Well, I was already down here now on the train, so I decided, well, I'm going to go and have a lunch down here, okay? And I'll go to Miller's Pub, which is not too far from there, okay? And for those of you that know Miller's Pub, it was a little bit like the Pump Room was, many 8x10 framed photos of sports figures and movie stars and the like. I decided I would go there. I went in, it was lunchtime once more. I spoke to the maitre d'. He said, what do you need? I said, table for one. He said, you can sit at the bar. I says, I don't want to sit at the bar, okay? How long is the wait? No, you're going to have to wait for a while, okay? I says, I don't mind waiting for a table, okay? I stood there for 2 minutes, and one of the owners came up to me and said, sir, just one. Come on over, I'll give you a table, okay? And he sat me down, lo and behold, next to Joey Heatherton's picture on the wall. And it was like, I don't know how many people remember Joey Heatherton, okay? I mean, she was a sex pot back in the day, dancer, singer, and the like. Our family saw Joey Heatherton at the Playboy Club up in Lake Geneva in 1969. So it's like, of all the places he could have sat me down, it's this place, okay? So now we fast forward ahead, and I finish a dinner at Dan Tana's, okay? And we're ready to walk out. I'm with the young salesman we have out there, okay? And he says, hey, look in the corner booth number 1, they've got Dabney Coleman there. I don't know how many people remember Dabney Coleman from 9 to 5 and Buffalo Bill on TV and all this stuff. Dabney Coleman's there, okay? And the group he was with had just left. And the young guy says, we should go over by Dabney Coleman and we should go in and buy him a drink and sit down with him. And I said, they come here because they just want to be, okay? They don't want to have autograph hounds and so on, around you, But he talked me into it, so we went on over and said, Dabney, big fans and all that stuff. We're wondering if you'd be interested in sharing a drink with us. He looked us up and down the way anybody would, okay, and said, well, okay, you can go and sit down and have a drink, but I've got friends coming. Soon as they come, you got to go. I says, that's okay. We sat down. We looked up. They had the Dodger playoff game on TV. So he says to me, you like baseball? Well, I mean, that's one of my passions, is baseball, okay? So he walked right into the door with that, okay? And we started talking baseball back and forth, and he told me about growing up in Corpus Christi, Texas, and he would take the bus up to St. Louis and go to Sportsman's Park, and one day he could see Stan Musial, the other day he could see Ted Williams, because they had two teams there, American and National League, and all that. And we spoke for about probably close to 30 minutes when the door opened. And the door opened, okay, and his group came in. I nudged my friend Jeff, and I said, we got to go. He said, why do we got to go? I mean, we're having fun. He likes us and all that stuff. I said, we promised we would go when his people came. It's always better, as Mom would say, leave them wanting more, okay? So we got up to go, and Dabney says, where are you guys going? We said, well, your people are here. You want us to leave and all that. No. You're cool, okay? And then he said to me, do you know who Hank Greenberg is? I said, yeah, sure. Hank Greenberg was a home run hitter for the Tigers going back in the 40s and all that stuff. He said, you look like Hank Greenberg. This is Hank Greenberg. He says, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying you look like Hank Greenberg, okay? But we had many wonderful nights there, sitting next to Clint Eastwood, as we said, at dinner, okay? Jack Valente, who was the head of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, you know, with the Oscars. Diane Cannon, if you remember, who is Cary Grant's wife, okay? And so we were very fortunate to be able to experience things like that. We have many, many more stories in the book, once more. Talk about going to Oktoberfest in Munich for the first time, making friends there, and going back 27 years in a row. When we got finished the first night, they said, it's really nice meeting you, Irv. We think we'll ever see you again? And we said, we'll be back next year. They figured that's a false promise. I says, no, I mean it, we'll be back next year. And 27 years in a row, we went back, okay? And then COVID came, and it closed for 2 years. Oktoberfest began in 1801 and was only closed during World War II, and then also here with COVID once more. Okay, so you got a number of other stories in the book that are interesting. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry, I didn't. I missed the punchline. Okay, so his group comes in, and he introduces these people. This is Bob, this is Mary, and this is my girlfriend, Joey Heatherton. And she's seated next to me. Of course, she didn't look like that, okay? But, so we're chatting for a bit, and then I said to her, did I understand Dabney correctly? You're Joey Heatherton. And she says, yes. And I said, I saw you in Lake Geneva Playboy Club back in 1969. She said, oh, I remember that place. It was nice. And I said, you won't believe this story. And then I told her the story about Miller's Pub. I said, so who would have believed that 2 weeks after seeing the photo hanging on the wall, we'd be sharing cocktails now? Yeah. Anyway, I just want to leave you with one thing. I apologize for dragging on here like this. But when I wrote the book came very easy to me. Okay, once I started writing, I would write 3 days a week. It took me only 100 hours to write the book, 59,000 words, 254 pages. Okay, no rewrites, no writing longhand and then bringing it to the computer with all these edits. Okay, it just came very naturally to me in terms of recounting the various stories and the like that I've shared with you today. You can see that, as I mentioned, I retired almost 3 years ago now, okay? And it's funny, when you retire, everybody goes and asks you the same thing, and that is, what are you going to do with all this free time? You know, and you feel as though you have to somehow justify doing whatever you want after working for 60 years or whatever. Okay? So for myself, I mean, I took a long, hard look, and the first thing I wanted to do was to see if I could go and find an in-person men's Bible class that would meet weekly. I wanted to go and get a greater understanding of the Bible. And the Bible's not an easy book when you read it. It's easy to go and get waylaid and confused. And because I had the time, I was willing to go anywhere. I was willing to go down to Moody or wherever. And Laurel said they actually have one in South Park, which is 2.7 miles from where we live. Okay, so I've been there for 4 years now, and it's really helped me in terms of developing my faith and a greater understanding. And I hope that if you read the book, you'll see that there's some stories there that are going to go and make you laugh. Okay, I didn't tell any tonight, but some are going to make you cry. Okay, some are going to make you shake your head. Did they really cut off a turtle's head in Taipei, pour water into the body, and then pour it into a glass and sell it as an aphrodisiac? Did they really do that? It's like, yeah, they did. Something like that. But I hope also you see that there's an overriding thread in the book, one based on faith, that God has a plan for us. He says, in Scripture, I knew you before you were in the womb. Okay? I have a plan for your life, and it's a plan for good. Okay, and when I look back at my life, okay, my life has been an amazing life, and there were certain times when I was in trouble that I was always provided for. Okay, when I needed an opportunity, okay. Opportunities presented themselves, okay? And so hopefully you remember that, and that it's true for you also. And I just take one, here we go. So what does it look like when you're married for 53 years, okay, and you've got 3 great kids, okay, and you've got 10 grandkids, okay? And if you look closely at this picture, we didn't notice it until this was the 50th anniversary dinner. Take a look at what's behind my head. Nice, huh? The antlers? Very good. I'll tell you one other quick story, and then I'll let you go. Our 2 kids were born. Katie was born, and then Irby was born 13 months later. Okay, and we loved those kids. Okay, we had so much fun with those kids. I tell you that when they were like 11 and 12. Okay, we said they're growing up so fast. Before you know it, they go to college, they meet somebody, they get married, they move to Portland. You see them twice a year. I would hate that. We should consider having another baby. And Laurel said, that's easy for you to say. I'm 37 years old. Okay. Anyway, we had another baby. Okay, and it was funny too because our other son is named Irv the Fourth. Okay. If he was born first, we weren't going to name him Irv. We were going to end that, okay? But he was Irv the Fourth. So with the new baby boy being born, Laura wanted to name it after her father, Kent. And I says, I really have to be honest with you. I hate the name Kent. I really don't like it, okay? Why don't we go back to the other names we talked about? And then one night when I was sleeping, I got the idea and said, what if we did this? What if we named him Kent Christian, but he only goes by KC. So that was a deal that was made. And Casey has been a real joy to our life once more. And that's how he came to move to Park Ridge, because he was always such a great athlete. He wanted to go to Maine South. And I said, Casey, I don't know what to tell you. We live in Norwood Park, okay? And then I came up with a brainstorm. And my oldest son and his family were in Boston. They wanted to move back. And my daughter, who had graduated from University of Illinois, she was living the good life on Division Street for 2 years. She wanted to move back. So I said, why don't you guys move into the house, you pay rent on the house, and we'll buy a condo here in Park Ridge so that Casey can go to school here. Because he really wanted to play on the football team and play in the state championship game and all that stuff. And with our intention is once he graduated, we'd move back. But once we were at Park Lane for just a month, we knew that we'd never go back, But I bring it up because, as I said, Casey is a great kid and a great athlete. And when he was 16, all he wanted for his birthday was a tattoo. Okay? And I said, I don't agree to that. I don't want you to get the tattoo, okay? And so I came home on his 16th birthday, and Laurel met me at the door, and she says, I have to tell you something. I said, what is it? She said, I took Casey for a tattoo today. I says, I told you I didn't want you to do that, okay? All right, let me go talk with him. So I went into his room, and I said, happy birthday, okay? Understand that Mom took you to get a tattoo today, yeah. So I want to see it. I want to see what it looks like, and was thinking it's a skull and crossbones or something like that, a dragon or whatever it might be. And he rolls up his sleeve and makes a muscle, and there on the muscle are my initials, okay, in Old English, ILK. And he said, I got this for you, Dad. So I'll leave you with that. I want to thank Historical Society for inviting me, okay? I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I apologize for being long, okay? But thanks once more, okay? You have a good night.
Does anyone have any questions for Irv or any comments you would like to make?
Irv, did you become the CEO of the company?
I did.
You never said it.
Yeah, well, I was president for 37 years, and then when I decided to leave the company, okay, and sell my shares in the company, I had to relinquish the role of presidency and assume the CEO position because I didn't have ownership anymore. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
We want to get him on.
How did it initially burn out with the roosting? What started the fire? Obviously, it's paper and that.
No, we have a kerosene heater in there, okay? And you have to open the valve, and then you have to let the kerosene be absorbed by the wick, okay? And then the boy who was working, then once you get the flame, then you have to turn down the valve overall. He forgot to go and turn down the valve, so it overflowed, And what people don't realize is the papers aren't what they were before, but if you bought a Sunday Tribune, it wasn't delivered to the newsstand the way that you bought it. Perhaps some of you remember, on Thanksgiving, it would be this thick with all the ads and all that stuff. What happens with Sunday papers is there's several different sections, so they deliver 2 sections on Thursday, and you put one into the other, call that stuffing, okay? And then on Friday, you get another section, okay? And then those 2 go into that section. And then it's on Saturday night or Sunday that you get the main sheet, which is the news section, financial, travel, sports, whatever, and you put it into that. So, I mean, it's really a job. So when the newsstand caught fire and they took all the papers out that were all prepared for, and just threw them, they had to throw them in the street and hose them down. What could you do? But, so that was only paled by the time when my folks finally took a 2-week vacation down to Florida. They drove down to Florida, and they came back a day early, okay? And we had had a tremendous rainstorm here in Chicago that had flooded all the streets and the like. I was stuck in Skokie trying to go and maneuver the back roads and so on to deliver the papers because, they talk about the Postal Service, nothing stops them. I don't know about that, but certainly in the newspaper business, you don't leave until it's done. It's the way it is. And then Patty will attest to this. So they have been gone for 2 weeks, and as you know, the newsstand is a cash business, okay? So all the receipts I would bring to the folks' house at the end of work on each day, okay? And put them on Dad's desk so he would be able to go and handle it when he came back. So, it was a lot of cash there, And so I finally got home after this huge rainstorm, and it was a phone call, and it was Patty. And she says, I heard something crash in the basement here. And it's like, I don't know. Listen, I don't know what it is. It's not the boogeyman. You're a big girl here now. Don't worry about it. So she says, you can't come over? I said, I just got back. I'm not going to come on over there now to go and check it out, okay? 5 minutes later, the phone rings again, and it's Patty. And she says, I'm calling from the neighbor's house. There's smoke that's coming out of the basement windows and all this stuff. And I've got all the receipts there for 2 weeks, okay? So I says, I'm on my way, again with this stuff, you know? So one of the vehicles we had was a VW bus with manual transmission, you know? And not only do Volkswagens have terrible heaters, but they have no pickup, okay? And so anyway, I get into this thing and I'm driving. Our garden apartment where we first lived, okay, was right across from St. Tekla, okay? So I had to go from St. Tekla to St. Juliana, okay? So I got into the vehicle, got on Devon, and I'm going as fast as I can to go and get up to Harlem. I get to Harlem, okay, and I hear the sirens from the fire truck, okay? And of course everything stopped. The fire trucks go by north on Harlem, okay? And as soon as they go by, I make the turn and I'm right behind them. And you know, they've got the signs on the back of the, you know, stand back 500 feet or whatever, you know, and I'm like, because I have to get there before the firemen get there, because I have to go in to get the cash so that it doesn't disappear. If you get my drift, okay? So the firemen that are facing me, they're get back, you're too close and all that stuff. We finally get to Alcott, we're driving down the street, okay? I arrive there just the same time as the fire truck does. I jump onto the VW, I run to the back door, figuring I got to get down there. I mean, I got to do it. I got a job to do. It's like SEAL Team 6. And you open up the door and the smoke was so overpowering you couldn't do anything, okay? The folks, because they missed us, decided to come home one day early, which was that day. So they drove by the newsstand and they saw somebody else working there and they said, where's Muggsy? And he says, the house, there's a problem. So of course they go and drive to the house, and as they cross Tuya and Alcott, they go and see, you know, all the fire trucks and the like, and they say, I wonder whose house is on fire. Then they get there just as they're breaking all the windows in the house to go and let the fire out and the like. So, yes, ma'am.
The good part was it the captain who you talked to and said that you had all the cash down on the, and he took you down there,
Yeah.
right? And he did let you go down. He got the money. You got the money.
You got the money, yeah. Okay. All right, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.